Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome you to the committee day of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'm Chairman Kurt Holbert. I'll be conducting the meeting. Danette, would you call the roll, please?
Dennis Gardner.
Here.
Jimmy Granberry.
Here.
Steve Jones.
Here.
Connie King.
Here.
Jim Ripley.
Here.
Tony Sanders.
Here.
James Stroud.
Here.
Kent Woods.
Here.
Tommy Woods.
Here.
Hank Wright.
Here.
Angie Box.
Here.
Brian McLaren.
Here.
Kurt Holbert.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Danette. Once again, welcome. We have a lot of special guests, or a lot of guests here today. I know the foundation's having a meeting up next door in about an hour, so I'm glad to have some of them with us today. We got former Commissioner Jeff McMillan somewhere in the, oh yeah, I get him and Bill Collins confused sometimes, but he's sitting over in the corner. No, glad to have Jeff with us today. Anyway, sitting next to him, if I can pronounce his name right, is Dave Kostersky. We call him DU Dave from Canada. Dave, it's always a pleasure having you here, and I know you're going to come up and speak, but it's an honor having you here with us today. Got Mr. Leonard Ezel with us again. Randall Haley from Southern Woods and Waters, Mr. and Mrs. Dyes from the Fur Harvesters Association, Mr. Ed Williams, Ron Crabtree from Quail Forever, sitting over here. Can't hardly see him in his camouflage jacket. And we got Axon West with the foundation, and I'm sure I left somebody out, but I don't see anybody else. I think that's everybody. Director Carter, you got any announcements?
I just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we had our budget hearing yesterday in the Senate. It moved out with all positive votes of everybody that was there at the committee hearing, and we also had one earlier in the House. So unless there's something different, we should be through with our budget hearings and as it goes forward. And just want to mention also we got several compliments on the people in the agency and how well they're doing in areas across the state. But anyway, just a little report on the budget hearings.
All right. Thank you, Director Carter. All right. I'm going to call on our chairman of the Wildlife Committee, Dennis Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. I'd like to call Mr. Dave Kostersky from DU Canada.
Well, thanks for the welcome earlier, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak to the commission and to the folks here from Tennessee. I've been happy to have been able to come here and be a partner with Tennessee for, well, my career, 16 years doing this job. I've been with DU for 28 years, but the last 16 years I've been doing this job where I get to come down and visit with state folks, talk about what our partnership's about, what we accomplish each year, and then talk about the future and what goals and objectives we have to go to make a difference as we go forward in our partnership. So thanks again for the opportunity and the welcome. Sorry I brought some snow with me. I tried to leave it north of the border, but I wish I could bring the ducks as easily as I can bring snow, it seems. My quick thing that I wanted to touch on is I saw these two slides that I'm going to have here recently as we were preparing for a presentation to what's called the Plan Committee, which is the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. It's that plan that was signed back in the 1980s where the continent agreed to work on waterfowl together. And so there's this group of folks that steward that plan. Joe Benedict helps out on that Plan Committee. And it's a really critical group of folks. And so they were preparing for a presentation, and they had these slides, and I thought these would really resonate well with everybody. So I brought it here. And what you're looking at is really kind of wetland conditions. So you got that blue dots that go up and down. That tells you how much our wetland numbers fluctuate year to year. They go up and they go down, and it has everything to do with how much snow we get and what kind of rains we get in the spring during melt and so on. And then that green line is just kind of, it smooths it out. It gives you kind of the 10-year running average of what wet conditions. So it gives you a wet-dry cycle that occurs on the prairies of Canada. And one of the things that we feel is really happening is a lot of folks don't really realize just how wet we've been up until the last few years. And so if you look at that red line, since the late 80s, early 90s, we've been in this generally wet condition. The prairies of Canada and the prairies in general, that big production area waterfowl, has been wet and getting wetter over that time period. So what is that doing? Well, it's really masking what's going on in the Canadian prairies, and it's masking this decline of wetlands. While this wetness has gone on and we've seen record duck numbers, 48, 49 million ducks on the continent, we've seen this continued loss of wetlands. We don't have great wetland legislation to stop wetland loss. We're doing as much as we can as a conservation partner, and we're working with provinces to get better legislation in place. But it's an underlying concern, and the one thing I'd like to see, this graphic, and I've asked our science staff, Jim DeVries, to push this out maybe 20 or 30 years, and look at that dotted line. And at what point does that dotted line end up at the bottom of the green line, where the driest it was? It's not that far out. If you continue to lose wetlands, that means you continue to lose carrying capacity. And if you don't have those wetlands, you don't have the ability to recover and get ducks back when things dry out and then get wet again. I warned Joe and Jamie a little bit that I'm going to talk a little bit about ducks while I do this. And I want folks to just think about what has occurred from waterfowl populations. If you go back to the 1980s, the last time we had restrictive duck seasons, we had low duck numbers. And we're getting down there. The numbers have declined 3 years in a row. We're down to under 40 million ducks. I think it was around 8 million mallards. But what's beyond those numbers, which still sound like a lot of ducks, is you're on a downward trend, right? So you have ducks go up. You have lots of young birds in the population, your population's growing, lots of young, immature, not knowledgeable birds, and then you stabilize at this number. And we were stable for quite a while in that mid-40s to 49 million. Duck numbers are just kind of holding there, great conditions, but not necessarily still growing. So you have less, even in that instance, you have less young birds in the population. And now in a decline, and you talk about millions of birds in decline, you have a lot less young to adult birds in the population. So what you're going to experience is a lot of smart, mature birds that have been through this before, the season before that. And don't forget, your life expectancy of a duck is 3 to 4 years, 3.5 years, somewhere in there. So you're having to replace your population every 3 to 4 years. So if you think about that, things are going to be tough until we see the next rebound and we see the next increase in population. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens because the landscape continues to change. That's one thing we know, whether you're in Tennessee or Saskatchewan, the landscape changes. It's never stagnant. Agriculture changes, urbanization changes, all these things are affecting it. Temperatures are warming, all those other things. So with all that in mind, I just want folks to remember, it doesn't mean that our seasons are going to be bad forever, but we're likely going to go through a decline because the population is in that downward swing, primarily driven by a dry number of years in the prairie pothole regions of Canada and the northern U.S. So if that continues, we'll probably have more years of tougher conditions. But when you get that population rebound, hopefully we have enough wetlands left in the prairies that we get that population to come back and you get young birds back in the fold. This one is, I'm not going to get into this one for much, but basically what we saw was a trend of declining cultivated acres, increasing grass, which was good for waterfowl. That was occurring kind of through that same time that things got wet. That's all good. We were getting less cultivation, more grass, more places for ducks to nest on the prairies of Canada. Well, if you look at the very end of this graph, the last few years, we started back into a decline in grass and an increase in cultivation. And this only goes to 2016. We're in 2019. We get agriculture census every 5 years. Our next one is due about 2020, so this year or next. By the time we get the information, it's usually 2021. And I expect, from what we've seen on the landscape, we continue to see more cultivated acres and less grass. Cattle agriculture has had a hard go the last little while, and that's resulted in more acres going from grass to cultivation. So not only do we have this shift in a decline in duck numbers, drier landscape, we're going to have less grass. So these things are going to probably cause us to have, in my opinion, a likely continued decline of duck populations for a few years. Again, I don't predict that things will stay down forever, but we should expect that things are going to be tough, and they've been tough before. It's just there's a generation of hunters that never experienced the tough before, right? It's been since the 1980s and things were tough in waterfowl hunting. We've continued to lose grass in the prairies, and then that continued wetland loss is affecting it. So since 1938, we've done a bunch of work in Prairie, Canada, and across the whole country. We've put 6.4 million acres on the ground. We've got 11,892 individual projects, and we've influenced an additional 157 million acres, much of that in the boreal forest. Critical for us to work in the boreal forest to protect those landscapes. And we've done that in partnership with many, many partners, including TWRA. We know that there's this clear relationship between Tennessee and the breeding grounds of Canada. Certainly we have to keep that relationship strong, and working together, and your investment in conservation in Canada is absolutely critical to us getting the work done that we need to do. We know where the ducks are in Canada. We've got thunderstorm maps across the prairies. We have target areas in eastern Canada, and they're developing thunderstorm maps for their next implementation plan in eastern Canada. So we know where the ducks are, and we know where the habitat is that we need to protect and restore. So we know the work that needs to be done. It's just a matter of getting the resources and having the time to do it. TWRA invested $166,000 last year, US dollars. Those are hard-earned duck hunter, waterfowl, Tennessean dollars going to Canada. That's a big deal. $166,000 is not a small amount. What I'm proud of is that we always leverage money. One of the things that Ducks Unlimited, I think, is very good at is taking a dollar and turning it into 2 or 3 or 4 or more. And that's what we did. Basically, by the time that hit the ground, that 166, and you turn it into Canadian dollars, it was over $800,000 of program work that could be done. We spent that, over $500,000 of that, on habitat retention, protecting what's left, putting primarily conservation easements to protect grasslands and wetlands, restoring a little bit, and then doing grassland restoration, and then we have to manage our habitat. A lot of folks don't like to pay for habitat management, and the reason I'll argue against that is when you put money in an investment, if you want a return on that investment better be healthy. And if our investment is into habitat for ducks, we better make sure that habitat's healthy so it can give us the ducks back that we're putting money into. And that's as simple as it is. These are the details. I don't need to spend a bunch of time, but as you can see, lots of easements, wetland rebuilds, that's wetland projects we've rebuilt, redesigned, and rebuilt. Restoring, it looks like a small amount of wetland restoration acres. I want to explain that. That's not all that we did. We do a lot more than that. The simple fact is most of our wetland restoration is being done with mitigation money. We get money from Department of Highways, oil and gas companies to do mitigation work, and we cannot use state dollars in partnership with mitigation money. You just can't do it. Or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service dollars. So we do that separate. We don't report on it here because we don't mix those two pots of money. Can't do it. But the rest of it, upland restoration, we're planting grass with landowners, with farmers, planting nesting cover on our own land and land that we're buying and revolving and selling with easements. This is what we did in Saskatchewan. This is what we're planning to do this fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends at the end of March. We've basically done all the field work except some of the wetland construction stuff that we do in the winter. But we're planning on spending $14.5 million in Saskatchewan this year, affecting over 37,000 acres and managing our inventory of over 2 million acres of habitat. Lots to do in Saskatchewan. It is our biggest expenditure, our biggest project base in Canada, and it's where most of the ducks come from. One thing that I can be proud of when I say that I work for Ducks Unlimited is we put our dollars where the ducks come from. 70% of the waterfowl come from Prairie, Canada. We put 70% of our expenditures into Prairie, Canada. Same goes with Eastern Canada and BC. And then within Prairie, Canada, 50 to 60% of the ducks come from Saskatchewan. We put 50 to 60% of the budget in Saskatchewan. We line it up with the waterfowl. This is what I was talking about. It's going to be dry. We could get precipitation in March. There's a good chance. Often we do get precipitation in March, but it's setting up to be another dry year for most of the Prairie Pothole region. Alberta's got some water, it looks like, but most of the really essential habitat for ducks and mallards that would come this direction or go into the Central Flyway are kind of east of Calgary and Edmonton, which looks a little drier. Where I live is, if you see the dot that says Regina, the little red dot northeast of there, a little ways is where I live. So we're dry. We have less than a foot of snow on the ground. Things are looking dry, but it's a cycle. We know that this cycle is coming. We knew it was going to come. It's essential for it to come, to be honest, because wetlands need to recharge. They need to dry out in order to cycle those nutrients and then get wet again, and then they have a flush of vegetation and productivity for the next batch of waterfowl. So this comes to my last part of my presentation. It's talking about the exciting opportunity I had to host a number of staff and commissioners this past fall. I'm always proud of our partnerships, and 30 years of partnership with one agency is amazing. 30 years of doing anything that's successful and effective over time, that doesn't get tripped up by too much in the way of politics or other things, is amazing in this day and age. So 30 years of partnership with Tennessee is something we celebrated in Canada this fall. And we set out on this Touchwood Ranch. It's a large property that Ducks Unlimited has in Canada that we manage for waterfowl, and there's cattle in there as well. It was a great opportunity to say thank you to the state of Tennessee. We thanked all the commissioners, we thanked the folks from Tennessee, the leadership, Ed Carter. Your leadership and follow-up to Gary Myers has been incredible as far as a leader, not just here in Tennessee, but a leader in this continent when it comes to continental waterfowl and really continental wildlife and resource management. You don't just work on waterfowl. I appreciate that you put your heart and soul into waterfowl, but there's so many of these international resources. When we look at the State of the Bird Report that demonstrates that the only real species that haven't seen a major decline are waterfowl and wetland birds. Every other group of birds is in a decline, significant decline. Why are waterfowl and wetland birds doing better? Because we're taking care of them. Because we're working on this collaborative North American plan to do the work that makes a difference for those populations. So the leadership from the state, from the commission, from the staff is second to none. And proud to say that we're a partner with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. With that, that's all I had. Hope I didn't take too long. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and speak and provide you a little update, and happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Dave. That was, as always, a great briefing, and we enjoyed the trip up there as well. It was very educational for me. I've chased ducks for a long time, and from my point of view, to see the work that gets put in to try to maintain that, so that hopefully I have something to do in the winter every year is great. I really appreciate it and enjoyed that. Anybody else have questions or comments? Commissioner Ripley.
Thank you. Dave, how receptive are Canadians to what you're trying to do up there? I wonder how many waterfowl hunters there are and how big a sport it is up there and how they react to you trying to acquire all the wetlands and that sort of thing.
So I would say if you look at conservation challenges in general, whether you're talking about Prairie, Canada, or anywhere in the continent, you've got those folks that have an ethic, right? They've got a conservation ethic. They believe in the value of the land. They believe it has a value for recreation. They believe it has a value for resource development and for benefits to society. And in Prairie, Canada, I would argue the same thing. You've got a chunk of folks that believe in that, have that conservation ethic, that believe that the land has multiple values. And so those folks are people that are really easy to work with. And then you have a lot of folks that see the land primarily as just an opportunity to overcome and to make money off of and to develop to the best of their possible ability. And some of those folks we have challenges in working with, right? When it comes to doing conservation work, setting an area aside or protecting it in perpetuity. Perpetuity is a long time, right? Saying we're gonna put an easement on your land and it's never going to change forever, that's a big deal, right? It's hard to do, hard to get a landowner to say that that's something I wanna do. So we are not running out of people to partner with that have that conservation ethic that we can find on the landscape, but we gotta work hard at sharing the message. When it comes to duck hunters, we don't have a lot of advocates when it comes to a duck hunting population. Very, very small population in Prairie, Canada. But we do have a lot of folks that care about the land. A lot of Canadians have a lot of pride in our country and the value that it has for wildlife and natural resources. So there's a bunch of pride in folks that may not be duck hunters, but see it as a place that they're proud of and proud to protect.
Commissioner Stroud.
Thank you, the government.
Yes, sir.
Is it easy to work with your government up there, or do you find that it's tough to get things done in a way that you need to get things done to move along? Is it tough or not?
It varies based on politics, right? So currently the federal government, when it comes to environmental issues, very good. They're a liberal government, similar to your Democrat. They put a bunch of money into environment. They put a bunch of money. They're big believers that climate change is real and we need to do something as a country about it. And so there's substantial resources right now with the Canadian federal government to do conservation work, protecting areas. They've signed on to protecting 17% of every significant ecoregion in Canada as an international agreement that they signed on to. So they put hundreds of millions of dollars, over $1 billion over a time period towards that. So there's opportunities there. Provincial governments have jurisdiction over things like wetland protection. I know I talked to you guys about this in Canada, and wetland protection is different. It's not federal, it's provincial, and those provincial governments, some of them are more inclined to put less obstacles in the way of industrial development or ag, and others are more inclined to maybe put regulations in place that are a little more restrictive. So it's variable. In Saskatchewan, the challenge right now is it's viewed, to protect wetlands is viewed as a bit of an obstacle. But we're working together, and I think we've had some inroads in the last little while. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's all one way or the other. It goes with political change. In general, I do believe my statement about Canadians having a connection to the land and a belief that the natural value of the landscape that we're fortunate to live in is something we're proud of and value it. But you're always going to have political challenges, I think, to get legislation in place, as an example. Yeah.
Commissioner McLaren?
Dave, I would like to say it was amazing what you showed us while we were up there, and never having been in that area before, to see the habitat and to see the things you guys are doing is phenomenal. And whoever came up with the conservation easement was genius in my mind.
You guys did. We took it from the U.S. The conservation easements were first in the U.S., legislated here well before us. We didn't get easement legislation until the 90s. And so we're behind. We talked to our counterparts in DU in North Dakota, and they seem to be further down. They got a lineup of people wanting to do easements because it's just been more acceptable. It's been a factor on the landscape longer. People have got a comfort level with it, landowners do. And we're getting there. But no, we turned to the U.S. led the way as far as putting legislation in place to protect lands through easements and for long periods of time. And perpetuity is something we don't want to waver from. There's an interest from landowners due to shorter terms, but we'll probably be willing to pay more to make sure it's there for a longer time.
As a farmer and an outdoorsman, to see the land being used for multiple uses and still protected for the wildlife is a win-win to me.
The last thing I'll say on that, Brian, is just, and I said this in Canada to you folks a number of times, the cattle industry, if folks don't understand Prairie Canada, it's all about grass, okay? So protecting the wetlands and then having grass there for a lot of these species to nest in. And we're only going to put so much grass on the ground, Ducks Unlimited, in our partnerships. We can affect land where we're talking about 60 million cultivated acres in Saskatchewan, 100 million across the prairies. When you talk about landscape change, it's about having grass on a large swath of that. And that's all about working with the cattle industry. We will not do it without a healthy cattle industry. So we will continue to fight to work with cattle industry, make sure as best we can that they are fair, that subsidies aren't unfair, or provide opportunities for them to be on the landscape, because they're critical, absolutely critical to the future waterfowl for you folks here in Tennessee. Guaranteed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I just want to close with saying that I think I speak for the commission when I say that we're proud to be a partner with you as well. And we appreciate you coming down here and taking the time to talk to us. Chairman Holbert? Oh, sorry, Director Carter.
Just a comment or two, Mr. Chairman. We've worked with Ducks Unlimited in Tennessee, nationally and in DU Canada. But just wanted to say, while Dave was here, how much we've enjoyed the partnership with DU Canada and how much it's meant, because he's right on target. When we look at our band returns and everything, that's where our ducks come from, Saskatchewan. And we have such a great partnership in doing that. And he mentioned former Director Gary Myers, and Gary was one of the authors of the North American Waterfowl Plan and was instrumental in putting all that together and getting it tied up between Mexico and Canada and the United States. It's easy to see on migratory waterfowl, migratory animals of any kind really, how much DU plays a part in that, but they also are involved in many other things as well in wildlife management. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is also Canada, and all the provinces in Canada are members except one, and they're about to join. So that co-authorship of everything we do, and they're such an integral part of all of our meetings. And as a matter of fact, it's been a little over 20 years, but in 3 years, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies will meet in Canada. I think Calgary is where we got it slated for right now. So anyway, just a shout out to DU Canada for exceptional partnership and all that we've done, and especially to Dave. And when you work with somebody for so long, they get to be good friends as well as co-workers. So thank you, Dave, for everything that you and DU Canada do for us.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Dave. All right, Wildlife Committee, I'd like to recognize Mr. Joe Benedict.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I've got to say, while we're waiting for my slides to come up, I'm proud to be a waterfowl biologist. Most of you know that earlier in my career, I was a waterfowl biologist in both the Atlantic and Mississippi flyway, and it's the the continental view, I think, of waterfowl that's helped me learn and understand, not just statewide perspectives, but how we manage wildlife, up and down the continent and over the state borders or the country borders. So proud to be a waterfowl guy at heart. So thanks, Dave, for all you guys do. It's the 2020 February top. Go left. Keep going right there. Excellent. Well, I'm here today to share for the second time the migratory gamebird hunting regulations for the 2020-2021 season. You'll recall that last month I gave this presentation and a little preview that it's the same presentation as last time. We've not received any comments since then, so this is the same presentation. I'll just go through it. So we talk a little bit about public input that we received. Then we'll go through the early season migratory game bird seasons, the duck, goose, and crane seasons, and then the raptor hunting seasons. So just wanted to remind folks the public input comment period for migratory game birds, because this is an earlier season setting process, begins in the fall. So October and November, we send out Facebook and email requests, public other announcements inviting the public to comment. And then since last commission meeting, we've also had an open public comment for comments. We receive input throughout the year and we kind of compile it during this period. And then of course we consult with our staff in the field. So there are no changes in the federal frameworks for the early season migratory game birds. And so the dates that I'm going to show you, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of tables here, they're basically calendar updates for this year only, except for the crow season. We've got some public input on crows, and again, I shared this with you last month, but everything will be the same time period except for updated for the 2020-21 calendar year. So the current crow season is 2 periods. We received input from stakeholders that wanted to hunt more in January and February when it's colder. And so the recommendation for crows is a 3-phase season with about a month of hunting in the middle of June to July, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday only, and then a longer period of weekend hunting only during the cooler months in the fall. And then finally the third phase, which would be 7 days a week from January 1st to the end of February. And again, this is a recommendation or a change that came from public input. And the most of the input we received was specific to that phase 3. Folks wanted to hunt all of January and February. So this accommodates those requests. And I know many of you received those calls as well and have had discussions with my staff and I, so appreciate that interaction. So here we get into several slides of just calendar date changes for the 2020-21 season. And I'll just pause on these slides. I think if I read them off, you guys would just be bored. So you see the 3 phases of crow at the bottom. Those, again, are the only changes to the seasons that we're proposing. So these are the early wood duck and teal season, and then the rail and gallinule seasons. Okay, for the dove season, again, just a calendar update changes for these three phases. We traditionally start on September 1st, and then we also go as late as we can into January on the 15th. So we'll move now into waterfowl and coot seasons, and there's just a few changes in the federal frameworks here that we'll share. And these are ducks, coots, mergansers, geese, brant, white-fronted geese, and then light geese, the conservation season. So there was a change in the Scaup daily bag limit that's coming up this year. Currently, it's 3 per day for the entire season, 60 days. The change is to go to a hybrid season, what they call a hybrid season, where you have 1 a day for 15 days, and we're putting those at the beginning of the season, and then 2 per day for the last 45 days of the season. And then the daily bag limit, you'll see at the bottom there, there's no change to that, but we just wanted to put that up here for folks to see that. So 4 mallards, only 2 of those can be female, 3 wood ducks, 1 pintail, 2 canvasback, 2 redheads, 2 black ducks, and 1 mottled duck per day. Not to exceed 6 total. So here are the calendar dates for next year's duck season. You'll recall that we have a separate duck zone at Reelfoot, and the only difference there is that the opening weekend is a couple weeks earlier than the statewide. And again, you'll see there's no changes to the daily bag limit except for Scaup, which will be the first 15 days at 1, and the remainder of the season at 2 per day. We also sort of revealed at the last meeting that we have an additional opportunity to provide veterans and active military personnel waterfowl hunting days. And so we want to thank our servicemen and women for their service. And just to let you know that we've put those dates, you'll see the bottom line there, the 2 Sundays following the conclusion of the regular duck season. So currently the youth waterfowl season is the 2 Saturdays following the regular duck season. Next year it'll be February 6th and 13th. That's 2021. And then we've added those veteran and active military days the following days. We do have a waterfowl survey out there, and I believe I shared this with you last month. We've got preliminary results from that. And the question we asked was, of the youth waterfowl hunters, do they prefer a Saturday-Sunday hunt or to keep it like it is with 2 Saturdays? And over half the folks replied they liked it the way it was. I know there's a question last month about that. So we've retained this as a recommendation to have the veterans on the Sundays and the youth on the Saturday. So that's consistent with what we've done for a number of years. So white-fronted goose season, again, we've got 2 zones, just a calendar date change for next year. The timing of these seasons, the length, the bag limits all remain the same. Everybody memorize the date so far? Excellent. The Canada goose and brant season, same thing, just calendar updates for the 2020-21 season. No changes here except calendar dates. And the light goose seasons, again, just updating the dates for next year. And then the conservation season. This is it's not a hunting season, it's a conservation season. So, light geese are overpopulated and they impact the habitat in the tundra. And so a number of years ago, I guess probably close to 20 years ago, the flyways, the state Fish and Wildlife agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service got together and said, how can we manage this? And there's a conservation season that goes basically during spring migration with increased bag limits and reduced restrictions. So you can use electronic calls and a few other things. So we issue a free permit if you want to hunt during that period, and you've got to report. I think there's 4 things you have to report at the end. So it's a great opportunity for folks to take advantage of that spring migration. Sandhill crane season, again, the same dates, framework of the dates as in the previous years. You'll note at the very bottom right-hand side, I provided the total number of tags we'll be issuing. It's 2,701 tags, and you can see the division between the statewide tags and then the crane zone tags. And again, this is consistent with last year, just date changes. All right, we're closing in on the end here. A couple more slides with dates. The raptor hunting season, these are for raptors, folks that hunt with raptors. And these seasons pretty much line up with our existing seasons. So again, they've just been updated for the 2020-21 calendar. So that's slide 1 of the raptors, and here's slide 2. So in summary, we've made a few changes, just a few, to reflect the federal framework changes. We've also made changes to the crow season based on stakeholder input. We've added additional days for crows in January and February. And we've added the additional active military and veterans days to the waterfowl hunting season and decreased the Scaup bag limit, again, based on the federal framework. So with that, we recommend passage of Proclamation 2001, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions from the committee, the Wildlife Committee? Any questions from the rest of the commission? Commissioner Sanders?
Joe, didn't last year we set the division between the crane zone and statewide later in the year?
I'm not following the question.
Well, you had on one of the slides, the crane zone, how many permit? This is for the next year, right?
Yes, yes, correct.
I thought we did that later in the year, as far as figuring out exactly how many permits were going where.
This is based, well, is Jamie, where's Jamie?
And my memory may be off, but.
Yeah, no. I think normally we hadn't really calculated this number prior to this meeting, but we had this time around, so I gave the information to Joe to present. It's still the 60-40 split that we normally do, giving 60% of the tags that we have to the crane zone at the hand draw, and then the other 40% we do statewide. And I know exactly what you're thinking at this point, because we need to have a continued discussion about. I've asked you to give me 3 years of a statewide season before we revisit this, and so we're at the end of year 3, and we will revisit it. So,
Well, my question, do we have data yet from this past season?
it is all sitting in Brant and waiting for me to send an email to Megan Loop saying, please get that data for me so I can figure stuff out. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay, so we just ended the 3rd season, right?
The 3rd year of the statewide season, correct, sir?
Okay. So that's why I'm curious about that part of the slide at this point.
Commissioner Sanders, if I might, I don't believe the number of tags is in the proclamation. We provided that for information only.
Okay.
So
That is
there-
correct. That is not in the proclamation.
there can be additional discussion of if the split would change from 60-40 to something else.
Thank you.
So thank you for asking that question.
Other questions, comments from the commission? Comments from the public? All right, and I just have one question. I noticed, and I probably should have noticed it last year, but I noticed that you can hunt ducks with raptors all the way through February. And as a duck hunter, I'm jealous.
That's right. That's right. It's a little harder to get them, but yeah.
Right, I'll have to get me a raptor now.
And I don't believe they make a shotgun named Raptor yet, so that there may be a little nuance there.
Everybody names their own, right? Sure. All right, well, so we have a proclamation. Commissioner Ripley, go ahead.
Along the lines of what you're saying there, I guess the number one question I get from duck hunters is why don't we move the season later in the year, move it into February? I think I know the answer to that, but for benefit of the public, I think it really is a question that a lot of people are asking. Can you address that for us, Joe?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. So the state's choice at this point is only within what the federal framework is. So the federal framework is the last day in January currently, right? So they made that change last year. Going beyond that, from a biological standpoint, there's concern that birds form their pair bonds on the wintering ground. And so the males and females pair. The later in the season you harvest, let's say, a male, the harder it would be for that female to find another mate on her way back to or at the breeding grounds. And so there's a little bit of a biological concern. We don't have really strong data on that necessarily, but we know, for instance, wood ducks in the south will begin laying eggs as early as late December. So those are paired birds that are actually reproducing already. And so, early migratory birds, teal, pintails, shovelers, things that go back north early, that you could actually impact the reproductive success of the bird, and there may be a population impact, which is why the framework typically stops then. In the days of market hunting, it wasn't there. So it may be a little cautious there because we don't want to go too far back, as far as population levels.
All right, any other comments? All right, so we have a proclamation. This is for the Wildlife Committee. We have a proclamation on, do we have a motion? All right, motion to approve. I got a second from Commissioner Sanders. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Against? Having none, proclamation's out of committee. And thank you, Joe. Next, I'd like to call Chuck Yoest for a CWD briefing.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I've got a little bit of a different report today than usual. I'm going to update you or brief you on a new website feature we have that relates directly to CWD, and then I'm going to digress for just a minute and provide a very short CWD update, because there's always things happening, and it's important to keep you as informed as we possibly can. So with that, the first item is since discovering CWD in Tennessee, we've realized a need that the agency has to better manage sick deer reports. And Dr. Grove is here today, and he challenged the agency to create a tool where the public could report sick deer, and that in doing so, we would not only provide better customer service, but we would also increase our deer disease surveillance. And other states have this feature, and he thought it would be a good idea for us. And we agreed with that, so we decided to look into the development of such a site, and that's what you have on the screen now. Without a tool like this, we didn't have a single way for the public to provide these reports. And when they did provide them, whether it be a phone call or just word of mouth, it led to inconsistencies in how we managed them. So we decided to develop this in order to bring consistency to that process, and then benefit in several other ways. But the lead developer of this is Lynn Barrett in our GIS work unit. So she created this survey that you see on the screen. And in the background, a lot of different staff developed an internal notification process, and then also a review system for these reports so that they're all given the proper attention. So when a report is made on this website, it could be a staff member, it could be you all, it could be any member of the public, would go to our website and have availability to this and make a report. And when they do that, an automatic notification happens to select staff members, and specifically the regional biologist will review that report and look at the circumstances that are reported, and then determine just how high of a priority it is to sample that animal for disease or for diseases. But just the report alone is good information. But some of the other benefits that we get is it improves our chances of early detection. You know, unfortunately, we aren't afforded early detection of CWD in West Tennessee, but if it ever were to occur anywhere else, we would hope to find it much earlier. It provides more deer health data, which will be beneficial. Another thing is it'll give us, you can submit a photograph through this system. And so, you know, they provide quite a bit of information when they submit this, but one of the things is symptoms, but also where it is, and then at the very bottom there you see they can submit a photo. One of the things that we don't have that we benefit greatly from are just good photos of clinical or sick deer, and we suspect that this will help us a lot. A lot of times we're challenged with, well, we don't see any sick deer in the CWD area, or why don't you have more pictures of them, and we think that this will help us with that. So there's that benefit. There's also, in developing this, clearer direction for staff on how to manage these reports or handle them. And then I mentioned before, it establishes a priority for sampling. And I want to emphasize that most of these reports won't require an agency response, like going out and seeing the deer, handling the deer, or even sampling the deer. But having the reports and the proper folks being notified, and then just the review of the report is a huge benefit to the agency. And again, most of these won't require a response beyond what happens automatically with the submission of this. So when a member of the public submits one of these reports, they'll get an automatic notification thanking them for the report, and then emphasizing that most reports don't require a response by the agency, but we appreciate the information because it means a lot for us, and it enables us to better monitor disease events and prevent those outbreaks. And lastly, the benefit is it's just easily accessible. It'll be available on our website all the time for anybody to report these animals. Now, this is primarily a Wildlife and Forestry Division initiative and responsibility, but we've had a lot of support and help from the Communications and Outreach Division, and then also the Law Enforcement Division. And I've also already mentioned the GIS Work Unit, who's been so supportive in this. So the plan is to go live with this website feature very soon following this meeting, once we've had an opportunity to share everything that all TWS staff need to know about this feature, and then them having clear instructions on how to utilize it. So that's all I have in regards to this, and I'll spin off to CWD now, but before I do, I thought I'd break in case there's any questions about this in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea too, while it's fresh in everybody's mind. Is Commissioner Granberry, you got a question?
Chuck, is there any thought about doing the same thing for Asian carp, since the last episode was sort of a week or so late in reporting the carp in Chickamauga?
No, sir, not currently. But I will say that reminded me that this is a bit of a trial for us, and to see what we can learn, because Dr. Grove actually envisions using this for more than just clinical deer, and maybe other types of wildlife as well. So it could expand, though.
All right, you didn't go over how you access that website. What's the avenue? Is it the CWD site? Is it the TWA? Is it the app? Is it all of the above? I mean, how do you get here?
All of the above. Yes, sir.
That'll be available on the app as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Anybody? All right, Chuck, thank you.
All right. So moving forward, I want to start, and I just have a little bit about CWD, but I'm going to start with an apology, which is going to be different. But I wanted to own something that happened recently. We had a landowner survey that went out to the landowners in the CWD affected area. And the intent of that survey, we did that in partnership with the University of Tennessee, and it's what we commonly refer to as a human dimension survey. We regularly do those to find out more about the beliefs and attitudes of people, especially in this case landowners in West Tennessee. And we want their feedback and to know how they think about the different management actions that we have for CWD. And recently, one of those surveys went out, and some folks acting on incomplete information have misrepresented that survey. And that's unfortunate. But we should have given you guys more notice that was going out, and that's on me. I'll be sure that we do that better in the future. So the survey went out, and it describes some management actions like I'm about to talk about some more, targeted removal, and in asking that question, we were clear that the intent is to control CWD and that this would only be done with landowner permission and that sort of thing. However, taken out of context, that information was controversial, and I know some of you all were asked some hard questions because of that. So anyway, I just want to say that one's on me, and that we'll better inform you in the future of that so that there's no surprises the next time we deploy a survey like that. So moving forward, I want to describe kind of I want to just describe some recommendations that I have for the agency directors and let you know where we are on considering these options. And these are the options that caused a bit of controversy in that recent survey. But the bottom line is that hunter harvest dropped, and therefore the deer population in the affected area is going to increase, and prevalence will increase as a result. And in order to minimize this, additional harvest needs to occur. And to accomplish this harvest that would supplement the hunter harvest, I'm recommending two things to the agency directors. And one is to implement a landowner CWD management permit that would allow landowners and their designees to harvest deer outside of deer season, and this would be much like what is done through depredation. And this would be limited to just the positive counties, and it would apply to all of Hardeman and Fayette counties, and then it would apply to the spark areas of the other 5 counties. For example, Madison County, if you look at the map there, you'll see the farthest north red dot. I describe that as a spark, so that's an isolated area of CWD. And if we harvest the deer in that area, the diseased deer, then we may be able to put that spark out. And it's going to take that to keep this disease from spreading. So I'm recommending that we allow that additional harvest throughout Hardeman and Fayette counties, and then in the areas of those sparks in the other counties. So that's the first recommendation. And the second one is that I'm recommending to the agency directors that we initiate a targeted removal program that is limited to the low prevalence counties. So that would be the 5. That'd be all the positive counties minus Hardeman and Fayette. So in other words, the low prevalence counties, or the spark counties, as we tend to call them. I'm recommending that we do targeted removal there within close proximity of those sparks. So not only would we limit it to those 5 counties, but we'd limit it to a defined area around those isolated cases of CWD. And I'm recommending that we do this in partnership with Wildlife Services, USDA Wildlife Services, and that TWRA would serve in a coordination role. And I emphasize that this would only be done on properties with landowner permission. So I realize these are aggressive recommendations, and I don't like having to suggest them, because I would prefer that we control this entirely through hunter harvest, but that's not where we find ourselves, unfortunately. So I believe it needs to occur as long as it's done responsibly, and I know that TWRA and Wildlife Services will meet that charge. So I wanted to update you on that discussion, and I'm going to be talking soon with the directors more about developing that. So stay tuned for more on that. We'll keep you posted. And lastly, on a lighter note, we had a Fayette County CWD public meeting the other night, and it was very well attended. We had 87 members of the public there, and it was a good meeting. And one of the things that I intentionally did at this meeting was talk about these options. And I'm proud to report they were well received there in Fayette County, and there were also folks there from Hardeman and McNairy County. So it was well attended, several counties represented, and they understood where we are, and they're as passionate as we are about protecting this this precious resource. So just wanted to provide that update, and that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Chuck. Any questions on the CWD? Commissioner Woods, Tommy Woods?
Could you define targeted removal?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I should have went into more detail. So it's very, very small in scope. So again, we'd be focused on those sparks. And is that part of it clear? I want to be sure that I'm clear on what. So this would be limited to those areas of isolated CWD in those low prevalence counties. And what would happen is that we'd get landowner permission, and then Wildlife Services would go on those properties and harvest deer. And they would, and any harvest would be beneficial because we get samples and we collect data from that deer. And then we learn more about prevalence, distribution, and then just harvesting additional deer will drop the local population there and decrease the chances of it spreading and that spark growing into a bigger fire. But it's very it's limited to specific areas, and in some cases it may be specific to does as opposed to bucks. It depends on the circumstances or the prevalence in that finite area. But is that helpful?
Yeah, it does.
Dan, is there anything else you? Come on up if there's more you'd like to say to that. Please. I should have deferred to the chairman. Is that okay, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Just the logic behind it, and one of the ways we're going about it is, and to kind of tie it into the reporting system, we actually did a beta test on it in the fall, and two of the clinicals that we got, the one in Madison County and the one in Tipton County that added those, came from that online reporting system. But they were both 3.5-year-old clinical does. So what we know, when we find something like that in the periphery, it's a lower prevalence, but if it's in a doe, doe is probably in its home range. And all the other members of that doe's family are probably infected. So if you go in the periphery where you have a very low prevalence, you have a good chance of getting ahead of the disease before it gets higher. So it's really a two-stage approach that we have here in Tennessee, because we've got an area with really, really high prevalence down in Fayette County and Hardeman County. And we're in that kind of core area. When you see the map with all that cluster, that's a really high prevalence. It's really difficult to go in and use those kind of management actions to try and manage that at that level. But the periphery, where you have a very low prevalence, you have a good chance of potentially getting ahead of that before it gets out of hand in that area. And so that's the underlying concept of it, is just focus on animals that we know it's probably a start of an endemic focus at a very low prevalence. And the focus would be primarily initially on does that were in the periphery that were tested positive, because yearling bucks, they could have just wandered in. There might not be other animals in that area. So if you're trying to maximize your effort, focus in on the does, and then you can work out to where you might have found bucks past that. So is that?
All right, so do you have a particular number of deer that you're looking to harvest in that area?
Yeah, the statistic at this point, we have our surveillance, our weight-based surveillance. For this, it would actually be utilizing a different type of surveillance scheme, and so we would actually be looking at about 300 animals in a roughly 28 square mile area. We would draw about a 3-mile buffer around where the initial central point was, and then look to get X number of animals from that area. That number would give us a statistical variation of a confidence level, basically, of what the prevalence would be. Based on the number of samples that we get, we can say that this is truly what the prevalence would be in this area. Because right now, some of the issues that we have is when we have that little one positive in the county, we're using all of the samples we took from across the county to tell you what that prevalence is. But we don't really know what it might actually be in that very finite area. And so roughly 300 samples would give us an idea from that area.
Thank you, Dr. Grove. Commissioner Box, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. What time of year is this going to be, just depending on?
This would be immediately following season, the close of seasons.
Okay, all right.
So in the time before they're starting to fawn out, you know, because you want to get them before they fawn out.
That's what I was
Essentially.
curious
So it'd be
about.
that kind of February, March period, and that's kind of standard management practice for the, 5 or 6 states that are actually doing this as a management tool.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
What's the method of harvest? How are they doing that? Thermal?
Hold on a
And-
minute.
Yeah.
We'll have a time for public comment.
All right, and I have one other thing. I think, from my perspective anyway, we need to maybe refine our messaging, because when we first start telling people about CWD, we're saying, it's going to kill our deer herd. But then we come back and we say, because of decreased harvest, we have increased deer herd, which is a contradictory to the initial messaging. And I don't know how you refine that to where you explain that it's over time that it decreases your deer herd. I mean, I understand that because I've been privy to more information than maybe some people get. But it is a mixed message that I feel like if somebody were watching now, they would probably be, well, that's the opposite of what they're telling us. So somehow we've got to be able to relay that easily to the hunters and make them feel like they still have the buy-in, so we still get their, maybe next year they'll go out and harvest the deer that they didn't this year. But that's, does anybody else on the commission have any questions? Commissioner Tommy Woods.
I concur with Commissioner Gardner there, and I also realize it's a moving target we're trying to hit, so it's going to change. You mentioned wildlife services would be responsible for harvesting these deer, and I would imagine that would be a bid-out process if we don't do it in-house, and I assume they will be responsible for properly disposing of the carcass. Would it be their responsibility or the agency's responsibility?
Yeah, so we have an already established relationship with them for different types of work, specifically geese and turkeys, and well, we don't do any active work with turkeys, but anyway, we have that agreement where we can. So we would work under that ongoing agreement with them, and they will be responsible for the landowner permissions. They have their own process for that. We'd help them make the landowner contacts to make that possible, but they'd manage the permissions. We would help them in the development of the harvesting goals. We will agree to the conditions or protocol for disposal and utilization, and we're already in the process of having those conversations to make sure that there's not any, disagreement on the front end. So anyway, we're being real thorough in our planning with that, and we're extra careful. We realize, the obstacles or challenges that come along with this, but feel an obligation to protect the rest of the state from this disease spreading. And as far as the counterintuitive messaging, it's kind of one of those unavoidable things, unfortunately. And the way I try to keep it simple, and I'm not sure if it works or not, but when you're talking to landowners, this is really about keeping the percentage of deer that are diseased in your local area as low as possible, the percentage of deer. And as is, we have areas in Hardeman and Fayette County where it's to the point where half of the deer may be infected with CWD in the worst affected area. So in that core area where the prevalence is high, it could be that high. So half of the deer could potentially have it. Well, we don't want that to be the case in Madison County. So the goal is to keep the percentage of living deer that are diseased to be as low as possible. And that's what we're trying to accomplish and prevent the spread.
Thank you. It's a tough challenge, but I think y'all are doing a great job. I'm always impressed when I get the new updates from you. I don't think anybody else on the commission has a comment. The public, Ed Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought it might be prudent for Chuck to explain who Animal Services are, that they're a division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yes, sir.
As opposed to a private contractor.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's the USDA that we're all familiar with, but they have a work unit within APHIS, which APHIS, you know the...
Animal Plant Health Inspection Service.
Good job. So, thank you. But anyway, they are the professionals that their primary work is controlling nuisance wildlife. So this is day to day for them. They haven't had a focus on deer at a large scale like this in Tennessee recently, but they do across the country. So they are the folks. I would call them the experts in this part of it, and they're geared up. They've got disease biologists and they're well practiced. And they're again, we've got an ongoing relationship for them. So, and we trust them, and we know that when we agree to a protocol, that they'll follow through.
All right, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Dr. Grove, for bailing Chuck out again. Commissioner Granberry.
Hey, Chuck, I might have missed it, but do we have our final numbers in and 100% of our tests back?
Defer to Dan again on that.
Yes, we do. We're still working out, there's some data errors and things like that. All of the positives have been reported back, and all the people that harvested positives have been notified at this point in time. Still trying to square away exact locations on about 30 of those positives. It's mostly just trying to get directly in touch with the hunter to confirm if they had provided one that actually was accurate. But we're sitting at about 14,243, don't quote me on that number, but that's roughly where we're at statewide. From Region 1, we've got about 12,000 samples, and from the 8-county area that was considered unit CWD this year, that's excluding the ones that were added as a result of the rule, the rule being enacted. In that area, we got about 10,000 samples, 301 positives out of Fayette County, roughly 163 positives out of Hardeman County, and then anywhere from 1 to 7 in the other 5 counties. The prevalences at the countywide level for Fayette County is roughly 14% prevalence overall. And again, when we talk about these, we did this in the public meeting too for the folks down there. Hardeman County is roughly about 7.8% prevalence, and that's countywide data. So that's actually really a diluted prevalence when we refer to that, because we know that 60% of the positives come from within about a 500 square mile area that's right there on the Fayette. Can you pull that map back up, Chuck? The Fayette County, Hardeman County area, and then it just kind of spreads out from there. So Chuck mentioned it, within that little core area, since we don't have all of our non-detect locations, we have to report it based on the next level of geography that we have, and we're getting reports based on county level. So if that makes any sense. So really, we know that the prevalences, when you look at the edges of the county, they're going to be lower. So in that little core area, it's going to be highest, and it's not going to be 14.3% in that core area. It's going to probably be closer to 50%, depending on the sex and age that you're looking at. And that's probably your adult males will be that. And your adult does are probably going to be anywhere from 20 to 35% prevalence. And then as you go out from there, the prevalence decreases because you have less and less animals on the landscape. So.
And the grand total positives, we're at 675, with 186 of those being from the deer season before last.
Yeah. That's the cumulative positive. So 488 positives from 2019-2020 season, and then from 2018-2019 it was 186.
So just a follow-up question, Chuck, why wouldn't you do targeted removal in those areas where you have the much higher prevalence rate?
The area that you're talking about, where that whole area right there, if you were to do it across that whole county, you're looking at 1,400 square miles. It's next to impossible to effectively do anything. And so the work that's been done with actually doing the targeted removal, it is effective at low prevalences. And when I say low prevalences, I'm talking about 3 to 4% or lower. And since we have such high prevalences there, it's nearly impossible And that's why we need more people with the landowner permits and things like that in those high prevalence areas is going to be the more effective. It's a numbers game when it comes down to it. So in the periphery, where we've got those 1 or 2 positives, you can focus in a very small area and have more of an impact. And that's Illinois is the classic model for that because they have low prevalences, low deer densities, and they were effectively have been able to maintain those prevalences at a low rate over the course of 20 years. And so whenever you start getting into this, we know based on some surveys that have been done in that kind of core area, for deer density, you're over 100 deer per square mile. And to effectively manage the disease, you need that disease, the deer density, not prevalence of disease, but deer density to probably be between 10 and 15 deer per square mile. So you would potentially have to remove over 100 deer per square mile just to get to that point. And you're looking at roughly, if you were to do it through the total area that we started with last year, that's 2,500 square miles. So you can kind of do the math and it just becomes exponential if you want to make a dent in it. And so that's why continued hunter harvest and continue knocking back the population on a wide scale is what our best tool is going to be for that higher prevalence area in the periphery of the targeted surveillance is going to be our best tool for that.
So final question, have any other states that we're looking at, best practices, come up with a solution to entice the hunters to hunt in those areas harder?
No.
All right, thank you again, Dr. Grove. I'll ask for public comment and like to remind you to please come up to the mic and state your name or any organization you're with. Anybody from the public have a comment? Let's see, we have one, Mr. Larry Woody.
Dennis Larry Woody, I can shop from here, Chuck. Do you know how long a deer can be infected before it starts to exhibit the symptoms?
Yes, sir. From the time a deer is infected, it could be 10 to 18 months before they show signs of the disease, visible signs. So, yes, sir.
All right, thank you. And Chuck, I just got one last follow-up on this. Have we talked to Mississippi yet to see what they've done just south of our border? I know they did a lot more testing than they did last year. I've spoken with one of their commissioners, but do y'all have any of that data yet?
Yes, sir. I actually spoke to them this morning, conveniently, and they're showing a lower prevalence just south of our border, but it's still fairly high. And they had a special hunt that they added at the end of their season and required that hunters have those deer tested. And they were successful in testing 600 additional animals in just a weekend. But I think only 2 of them were positive. So they've still got a fairly high prevalence just south of us, but nothing like we're experiencing in the core areas of Hardeman and Fayette.
All right, thank you very much, Chuck. We appreciate the briefing. Thank you. And Chairman, that does it for the Wildlife Committee.
All right, going to call on Chairman Tony Sanders of the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to call Pandy Upchurch to the podium.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Pandy Upchurch. I'm the Assistant Chief of Biological Diversity, and I'm also the Endangered Species Coordinator. And Biological Diversity is asking for a budget expansion of $223,486 to receive our Section 6 endangered species money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is 100% federal money with a 75 to 25 match. That 25% match is made by our research facilities such as the Tennessee Aquarium or Tennessee Tech or the Nashville Zoo. They provide that match for us. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Any questions from the commission? Any questions from the public? All right, you're getting off easy today, Penny.
I know, thank you.
All right, Budget Committee only. I'll take a motion. First and second was given. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Carter, I believe I get to summon you.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I'm going to speak a little bit about the elevator in our central office, and about all I know how to do is punch buttons to make it go up and down. And if you have specifically some questions about it, Dwight Hensley, our engineer, will be able to explain those way better than I could. But the short story is the elevator in our central office is 54 years old. And over the last year has caused 2 fires, and eventually it just quit working altogether. So that was in July. We began the process of trying to replace that elevator. It's been a long time coming. We've had to relocate people from the upper floor that, had a little bit of a problem navigating the stairways, and it's been a real problem in trying to get things back and forth. But anyway, long story short, we finally have gotten a purchase order through. It's a $200,000 expenditure, which is much more than I thought it would be. But anyway, it's going to take a while to get it all through, but they've asked for equal payments of $50,000 along the way as they hit each benchmark as they put the elevator in. So overall, we're asking for a budget expansion of $200,000 to finalize actually, it's not a repair, but the replacement of the elevator in the Nashville office.
Thank you, Director. I can attest the elevator does not work. I can also attest that the aluminum ramp you have out there is slick when it snows. Any questions from the committee? Rest of the commission? I'm going to ask the public, but. All right, for the committee, I'll take a motion. Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will it be fixed by the time I get off the commission? I want to call Ken Tarkington to the podium.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. In your booklets or on your pad, whichever, you will have a 2-page report, financial report. And, excuse me, I'm reporting on the month of December, through the month of December of 19. At the top of the page, the boating fund registration income is about 6% less than the actual anticipation or projected amount by $146,000. The expense to the budget through December is approximately 24%. In the middle of the page, the wildlife fund has collected approximately $358,000 more than projected through December, and the expense to budget is 35%. At the bottom of the page, the acquisition fund, wetlands acquisition fund, has just shy of $20 million at $19,650,000. And on the second page, details our investments that are invested through the state treasurer. And the year-to-date earnings from July through December is through January is 2.56%. I have a little bit more current information through January rather than December on those. The SPIF account, which is the interest-bearing funds that are not invested, currently earns 1.69%. Any questions or comments?
December's half the year, right? We start in July?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
July through June.
Okay. Any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I believe
All right.
that's.
We're going to take about a 10-minute break and then come back and finish up.
That's all you spend. Unless they have something coming up.
right, we'll call the meeting back to order. And Kate's head over there. So I'm going to call on our chairman of the Boating and Law Enforcement Committee, Commissioner Brian McLaren.
And I'll call on Lieutenant Colonel Cape Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission. At the last meeting, Deputy Director May did a presentation on a tagging system, a new electronic tagging system. And we gave guidance to go ahead and change the proclamation that would outline the process for this. And it's basically two separate processes. In the past, in the Proclamation 1805, manner and means, we had this lined out where you would check in your big game harvest, but it didn't mention tagging anymore. So what we've done is we've gone through, and I worked with Chief Benedict and also with Thomas Moncrief to get this accomplished, and we put this together. So what I'm going to do is present the amendment to Proclamation 1805. It'll be 2002 in manner and means. So what we did is we removed in its entirety the Section 6, and it is now stated in Section 6, big game tagging and check-in, where before it was just check-in process. And I'm going to go through this and read this just so we have full clarity of what it says. Prior to moving any harvested big game species, deer, turkey, bear, or elk, a hunter must tag the animal using Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency mobile application, the TWRA website, or a physical tag provided by TWRA. Number one, continued, if a hunter uses the TWRA mobile application, the TWRA website, and the tagging and check-in process are completed simultaneously, and the hunter will receive a confirmation number. So what that means is, if you use the mobile app, and you're out there and you're sitting in your deer stand, you harvest a deer, and you go down and to tag it, you get into the mobile app, which Michael explained last commission meeting. You get into that, you go ahead and you tag it per the mobile app. When you reach service, if you don't have service at that time, it will automatically be checked in one step. That'll complete your process. So that's that process. If the animal is tagged with a physical tag provided by TWRA, i.e. the paper tag, all information requested on the physical tag must be provided by the hunter. The tagging process is complete when the hunter has provided all the requisite information on the tag and affixed the physical tag to the harvest animal. That's your tagging process is complete at that point, okay? In Section 2, after a hunter has tagged a harvested big game animal, the harvested animal must be checked in at a physical check-in station via the TWRA mobile app or via the TWRA website. So one of those ways you've got to go. If you put a paper tag on it, then you've got to complete the process by going to the check station or doing it on mobile app or the website. All big game must be checked in by the end of that calendar day on which the game was harvested. Additionally, big game animals shall be checked in by the harvesting hunter prior to be gifted to another or transporting the animal out of state. Continued, number 2, evidence of the big game animal species and sex must be available for inspection by TWRA personnel until the animal is checked in. After check-in, documentation of the TWRA confirmation number from approved check station, TWRA website, or TWRA mobile app shall be available for inspection by TWRA personnel until time of final processing. This documentation of a confirmed check shall accompany any big game animals taken to a taxidermist, meat processor, or gifted to another. All this language is the same as it was before. This is all relative to checking the animal in and maintaining your confirmation number. So that didn't change. Continued on number 2, the evidence of the animal's sex, species, and antlered status must remain with the animal while afield. Additionally, turkeys must remain intact until they're checked in. So if you check it in immediately there at your stand by the mobile app, once you check it in, if you wanted to clean it there, you could do that once it's been checked in. Unless a special hunt regulations apply, all harvested bears must be checked in at any approved check-in station, TWRA website, or TWRA mobile app. Bears may be whole or field dressed, but must weigh 75 pounds or greater when processed to field. If bears are quartered or boned out, the total of the meat, hide, etc., must equal 75 pounds. That too is not changed. That's all the same. And where it talks about unless special hunt regulations apply, that's the bear reserve hunts that we did, if you remember last year. Those had to be checked in, and will have to be checked in at a site that they note on there. Elk may be checked in, must or shall be checked in as instructed in the hunter's informational packet. So the hunters all receive a packet. It'll have that information in there for them to check that in and be instructed how to do it. By completing the required check-in information, whether on paper or electronic form, the hunter is affirming that the information is correct. That's just saying that when you check it in and it goes into the system, if an officer comes to inspect you and for instance, they had checked it in for somebody else, that's what that's talking about. You got to make sure that you're affirming that you killed that animal. Any questions? Commissioners, we asked you to approve amendment to 1805, which is matter means 20-02.
Do we have a motion on this? Motion's been made and seconded. Of the voting committee, any discussion? Does the public have any? Yes, sir.
My name's Ed Williams. When I hunt, I'm on a lease with some guys. Some of those guys don't have a smartphone. And in the past, I've been able to check their animals in using my smartphone with their numbers. Will that change, or how will we?
No, what they will
accomplish
have to do is they'll have to affix a paper tag. It'll be provided with their license, or if they have a lifetime license, they can go on and punch their number into the website, into the TWRA site, and it'll bring theirs up, and they print tags. They'll affix that tag and then bring it to you. And once you go through that process of checking it in, either on the website or the app, however how you do it, or they do it, you'll be able to do that. And once it's checked in, then they're fine. And they have a confirmation number. You just make sure they get that confirmation number.
Okay, so I can take their tag and check it in on my phone?
You can, as long as you use their TWRA
As long as I
ID
use-
number to enter
yeah.
that into their system.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
That's pretty much.
And
what
then
I
when they
have
get
to
a
do.
confirmation number, they won't have it on their phone because wouldn't have one, but you can write the confirmation number down. As long as they have it, the officer can look that up.
Write it on the tag.
That's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Ripley?
As far as the process that those of us have used, using just the smartphone, that doesn't really change at all by any of this?
No, sir, it'll remain the same. So but the only thing that changes about that is, Commissioner Ripley, is if you went and killed a turkey and then took it back to your truck and got in there and did that, that would not be allowable. You'd have to go ahead and tag it immediately with your phone. And as soon as you tag it, if you have service, it'll upload and your process is done. If you have to drive 2 miles to get to service, once you do, you have to drive 2 miles, it will upload immediately without you doing anything further.
Thank you.
I had one question on the turkey. I'm there in the field. I don't necessarily have scales and measuring tapes and all that. What information are they asking to tag in that turkey in the field?
What is on that? Do y'all remember? So you, you know, yes, I mean, it would be something that you'd want to do when you're putting that in, if you were doing it with a mobile app. I mean, the weight, it says on there, do not estimate. I don't think you're required to put that in, are you, Joe? The weight is not required, so it says on there, it used to, do not estimate, but You know, I don't know what data we get from that, but yeah, if you carried a ruler with you, that would be good, or a little tape.
Okay, thank you.
But if you don't want to do that, you could put the paper tag on it and then do it once you get back to the house and then check it in through the website or go to a physical check station. That would be optional.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think the important part of this is that now, going forward, starting this turkey season, you'll be required to tag an animal either by your mobile app or by paper tag before you move your turkey harvest this year. And that's the important thing to take away from this.
I think this is very important. I feel like we've had a lot of birds slip through the cracks. People forget, and I'm just going to assume they accidentally forgot to tag them when they got home or check them in when they got home. And I'm really hoping that this will help our turkey numbers as big as about anything that we've looked at, in my opinion. I guess we're ready to vote. All in favor of the electronic tagging, say aye. All opposed? Passes. Committee. Chairman.
All right.
Commissioners?
Anybody got anything else? Any commissioners? Any comments from the public? Director Carter? All right, commissioners, I know we've got an event with the foundation tonight. Bus will leave the hotel at 5:15, and it is a bus. It's not a van, so just letting y'all know. I will say, I see Dwight Hensley sitting out here. I know, Dwight, your crews are going to be very busy over the next few months, and I know everybody will expect their courtesy dock. Everybody's going to want them put back at the same time, and it just doesn't work that way. That's right. So I know we've lost a lot, and I appreciate what your guys. I know a lot of them got out before the high water was up and during it and cabled them off, but your crew gets unnoticed a lot of times. But you guys do a lot of hard work, and I know you got a lot of hard work ahead of you trying to get everybody fixed back up. So appreciate what y'all do. So all right, we're adjourned.